Stop my video. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend our webinar on data protections. Again, my name is Heather Miller, and on the line is the entire IRB team here to support you. At the end of the presentation, we will have question and answers for you to be able to type your questions, and we'll do our best to answer. If you have specific questions relating to you, you can email us at irb@gcu.edu if you don't get your question answered, and I'll mention that again. But this entire presentation is on data protections. So let's talk about what data protections are and what this means and why this is important to you. When you think about interacting with your participants, there's many different ways that our researchers collect data. Some is archival, right? So it's already existing. Some researchers use questionnaires and ask questions where the participant will fill it in. Some have a more traditional, what we know as a survey, like something that measures a construct like leadership or employee satisfaction, where you click on a little button and it says agree or disagree. Some of you use interviews where you'll sit down one-to-one. Sometimes it's an online environment, sometimes it's face-to-face. Some of you will use focus groups, again, where you have a group of people answering questions. So when we think about your particular study, when you think about it, you need to think about what impact it has on the participants and what it means for privacy and protecting data. One of the things that's most important when thinking about a research project is how are you going to keep the data private and protected? How are you going to protect identifiable information? How are you going to make sure that your data are de-identified? And it's very important because depending upon where you are, what state you're in, if you're collecting data in different places, protections can be different. And also, of course, you know, everybody has different levels of risk that they're willing to take as a participant. So you're going to want to be sure that when you consider your research participants, that you can ensure to them that to the best of your ability, you are protecting their information. And when we think about how you're going to protect that information, it comes along with having a very clear data collection plan. When I say that, and when we talk about this in the office at the IRB, we want to make sure that the participants know what they have to do, what they have to answer, how long is it going to take, where it's going to take place, and how their information will be secure, safe, stored in a time when folks are weary about getting their personal identifiable information out there in the open. So you're going to want to think about what is your data sharing plan? Who is going to see it? How are you going to protect it to make sure that it is private? Where are you going to secure it? And how are you going to store it over the long term? Think about things like online clouds. They're not very secure. We hear about data breaches all of the time, right? We hear that if you shopped at Target between a certain time and used your credit card, they got all of our information. Even the credit bureaus had hacks, right? So of course, you know, we don't expect all of you to be the top of the IT, you know, best person in the world, but we have to make our best possible efforts at protecting data. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It also affects feasibility. And when I say that, it's because one of the things that we've noted is that because research participants are in fact so weary of sharing their personal information and of answering questions, regardless if you have an anonymous survey, they get weary that you're not protecting their ISP address. If you're interviewing somebody, how are you going to protect the information when you get the information transcribed? Who's going to actually transcribe it? So when you're thinking about your participants and collecting that information, you're really going to want to think about the feasibility or the overall doability of your research project so that you can get the information that you need from them, right? You want those participants, and that you can do it in a timely fashion. I've provided you with a link, and this will be put out. We do have a separate webinar on feasibility and a little worksheet that you can fill out, things to consider. Sometimes when you're so passionate about your research, it's difficult to really put yourself in the place of a participant because your research is so important to you. But make sure that your participants will understand how they're going to be protected through the entire process. So let's talk a little bit about where this is all stemming from. About 3 years ago, the Office of Human Research Protections started talking with institutions on how to alleviate some of the burden that was happening within IRB offices. And institutions started to chatter about, let's revise the common rule. The common rule was revised in its entirety and implemented last year. So we're a little bit over a year with following the new regulations. Here at GCU, we wholeheartedly embrace the new regulations. We worked hard as a team. Our information changed to reflect those new regulations and what they're focusing on. And they're really focusing on making sure that the participants know what they have to do, how long it's going to take, exactly what's required, what they have to answer. You'll hear me talk about those things ad nauseum in other webinars, but they're really, really passionate about making sure people's privacy is covered and that the regulations are followed and that data are protected. This is incredibly important. On top of that, not only do we have the common rule, which rolled out in its entirety a year ago, we also have something called the California Consumer Privacy Act, and also something called the European General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. These are 2 additional regulations that are overlapped, layered on top of the common rule. And if you've done any online shopping, I was shopping for a backpack for my daughter the other day, and it said, hey, if you are in California, please click in this box so that you can continue shopping for your backpack, because we have new rules on our privacy regulations, and this website might be downloading some of that information. So this is something that once you kind of understand where it is, it's everywhere, and who you're collecting data from, you're going to understand that, of course, it's something that we need to address. It's something that as a researcher, you need to be considering as you lay out your data collection plan. It's all around us. And when you start to notice, you're going to notice that, in fact, it's probably stuff you've already seen. We're just making sure that when you think about what's happening in your day-to-day life as somebody who uses technology, that also applies to your research projects. So where does this come into place with us? And it comes on our informed consent. We have an entire section within our informed consent called privacy and data security. And what I did here is just give you a tiny little snapshot of what that looks like. The information within the informed consent goes back to following the common rule that was implemented last year. So again, having that clear data collection plan and that clear plan on how you're going to protect the data, it's really important. It's more than just a sentence that says the researcher will secure the data. That's just simply not enough anymore. You really need to understand what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. If you're going to have interviews and you're going to be sitting there face to face and you have paper data, how are you going to collect and protect that? Versus if you're in the online environment, how are you going to collect and protect that? What type of data you're collecting? So this is something that's going to take some thought on your part, discussion with your committee, some digging on who you're trying to collect data from. If you're using certain applications like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, what their privacy agreements are. If you're using social media to recruit participants like Facebook or LinkedIn, if you're using a closed group versus an open group, you really need to do some digging and be a bit savvy on how you're going to tell your participants and how you're going to protect their data. And you'll have to tell us too. It's part of the application. But what's participant facing, of course, is the informed consent. And people want to know how their data is going to be protected. So with that said, let's talk a little bit more about the Consumer Privacy Act in California. This is applicable to California residents, and it's identifiable information. Now, here's what you need to think about. Identifiable information, like my real name is Heather Miller, but in full disclosure, one of my social media names is Judy Blukers, and I'm not making that up. Judy Blukers was one of my dogs that I had when I first started graduate school. So if you're savvy, and anybody who's known me for the last 20 years will know Judy Bluchers is really Heather Miller. But what the Consumer Privacy Act has said is that even stuff like my little cover name of Judy Bluchers, even Judy Bluchers is a name that you could connect to Heather Miller. So you can't say, well, I'm just going to call her Judy Bluchers and it's not really Heather, because that now is considered identifiable information. So anything that's a unique personal identifier, anybody's online identifiers with IP addresses, email addresses, account names, of course, all the very basics like Social Security and your driver's license, your passports, any of that is identification that consumers have to be clear that they're going to either have to have that information be available to the researcher, and better yet, as a researcher, I highly recommend you consider what you're asking. Internet and other electronic network activity can now be traced to certain individuals. Of course, we know this, everything from browsing, search history, information regarding what website that people are looking at, applications, advertisements. And of course, we all know this. If you spend your free time shopping for shoes on Zappos, and I'm not saying I know anybody who does, but you're also going to notice that maybe the Nordstrom shoe company also pops up in other parts of your screen, or other shoe stores around that have the same type of boots you've been looking at. These are things, again, that we experience in our day-to-day life, but you have to think of it in the eyes of a participant. They want to know what you're going to be asking and how that information is going to be protected. Of course, anything to do with professional employment information has many layers, because anything that a researcher does that could affect the livelihood of one of our research participants, that layers on additional risk for the participant, as research cannot be detrimental to their livelihoods and also their educational information. You could find out what a participant's research, or I'm sorry, their education is by who they are by their education. So it's called deductive disclosure. And what that means is that you could deduce who is who based on information they gave you, even if you didn't ask, hey, is your name Heather Miller? So I want you to really think about this and how it's going to affect you. Because the California Consumer Privacy Act, it's going to impact your data collection if you're collecting any personal identifiable information. All of these different companies that are based in California, like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, they all have updates to their privacy policies. And individuals can choose not to share their data with any third parties. So let's say you're using, I don't know, SurveyMonkey to collect information for you, and a California resident might be like, no, I'm not going to answer that, and you can't make me. And they can't. So they can request at any time that data that have already been collected that they think could have maybe linked to them be withdrawn from the study. So you can imagine how difficult that would be, right? Because their alias, like their alias name that they use on social media, could be linked to them, and they know that, and now they want you to take away, you know, their data out of your data set. So I have to say that right now within the IRB world, the regulatory officials are figuring out how to operationalize this. This is all rolled out in the last 6 months. There's a lot of chatter, and we're all doing the best that we can. Big giant institutions will hire people that are specialists in trying to understand these. Institutions that have to do with a lot of like overseas and patents and information, working with researchers within Europe, for example, and we'll talk about that in a minute. They have to hire specialists to try to figure out how can they do the research. But in a nutshell, working with some of the apps that you might use, like Qualtrics and SurveyMonkeys, in some cases they actually have like a button that you can click that would exclude people in California from having to even be a part of the study. These are all questions that you're going to need to ask the app folks, that if you're using any of those apps, to work with them on how to exclude people in certain areas because of these privacy acts. And the other thing is not to collect any identifiable information and stick with anonymous data collection when thinking about California residents. That would be the and or circumstance. Again, in some cases, the apps allow you to exclude certain portions of people because of these privacy concerns, and in other cases, you could simply not ask anything that could identify anybody to anybody in any way, shape, or form. Nothing, not their age, not how long they've worked at a place, not how much money they make, not their name, not their education level, nothing. That you just simply would have the survey. So for many of you, when I say this, you're going to really need to consider those words, because often when we see studies roll in, they're coming in with what a lot of researchers are calling demographic information, but that information often could fall under these Privacy Protection Acts, and that it could identify somebody, and it becomes problematic, especially if that person decides they want their data out of the data set. Okay, moving on. And it gets more complicated, because now we also have the EU GDPR, which is a lot like the California Protection Act, in that it has so many layers of concerns regarding protecting the participants. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a resident of Europe. It means that you have to be in Europe. So even if you're an expat and you're hanging out at your, in your apartment in Sicily, you would fall under these guidelines. So any person who's even visiting the EU could be affected by this. Now, again, this is becoming quite an ordeal. I have a close contact within the human research protection world who works at an institution where his researchers are working on things to do with solar development and oil and gas with members of the EU. And they're trying to navigate this every day. This could come into play with you in your study if you're sending out an anonymous survey and there's somebody from who is living or hanging out in the EU who answers it. Again, reputable app companies like Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey are trying to work on this by having exclusion buttons that you can click that will help you not get those people as part of your study. But if they're important, and if they are going to be a part of your study, you're going to need to figure out how you're going to work within the GDPR rules. And their rules are incredibly, I guess, both broad and vague at the same time, because they have told us the rules say that any information related to identified or identifiable information, even your name, of course, ID numbers, your location, where you are online, even psychological information, genetic information, anything to do with mental information, economic, cultural, social identity of the individual. And when you sit back and you think about this, you're like, wow, this is every possible way that you could identify somebody. And the answer is yes, I know. That's why we have to be particularly careful. The information associated with an individual, especially in the online environment, and identifying them is it's everywhere, right? In terms of how that person could be identified. And the GDPR has said, in fact, pseudonyms or coded data, like if you interview me and you say, okay, I'm going to rename the interview with Heather Miller as Ella McGee, if you said that, in fact, that still could be linked to me, because somewhere there's going to be a sheet that says, okay, Heather Miller is really Ella McGee. So these are all things that you want to consider, and regarding your study and the feasibility of your study. If you are specifically going to be working with a group within the European General Data Protection geographical area, you're really going to need to start way ahead and consider the feasibility issues, because it is so highly regulated, and just about everything is considered personal identifiable information. So the whole GDPR has restrictions on even transferring the data from EU to US. Again, some of the bigger app companies, if you are going to be doing something in the online environment, using those app companies, they can help you with restricting access to that. But you're really going to want to be careful, because the individuals have their rights to access the data, erase it, and they can object to it. So you just think about, whoa, how are we going to manage this? And frankly, right now, it's such a difficult thing to manage, and the extremes are so, the fines, if you, as an institution and as an individual, that are associated with the GDPR, and there's so much talk about making sure that participants are protected, that right now it's really going to become a feasibility issue until there's more clear guidance. The GDPR people have given this information to all of us. It's you can Google it, and we have many websites that we'll be able to provide you with, but you really need to be on your game when it comes to these privacy policies for anything to do with social media. Everything has to be totally clear to the participants. You have to understand how you would get that data erased if you had to, and you need to be very clear on the ramifications that it will mean in collecting your data. We recommend that you, at this time, if you are going to do anything with either California or the European Union that falls under these restrictions, that everything is 100% anonymous and no personal identifiable information in any shape or form, which largely falls under what is currently being categorized as demographic data, be used, because it will be so difficult. And in the IRB office, we will be watching this very, very carefully as we go over time, over applications. And so the next couple of slides are just a few places that you can look, and that, again, this will all be posted on the LDP. That this information will be things that you can investigate more if your research is going to fall within these parameters. So I realized that that was a lot really quickly, and it's a lot to digest, but in a nutshell, participants are demanding more, and they want to be protected. Entire countries, now we have California, who is on board with making sure that their participants are protected. And when we think about our own research studies, we really need to have a clear scope, we need to have a clear sequence, and we need to have a clear plan on how every single individual form of data are going to be protected, regardless of who it's going to go to and how you're going to manage it. You have to have a clear plan, and it has to be well developed. So with that said, we will now have a question and answer where we will do our best. If your individual questions do not get answered, please email us later at irb@gcu.edu, and we will do our best to get you back a response within 48 business hours, as after these we do get quite a bit of questions, and we're keeping our operations just chugging right along. Again, we appreciate you being here, and I want to put in a plug for our IRB office hours, which are posted on the DC network. They're every Wednesday morning, and you'll find links to that. And we have a lot of information and videos. We know that there's a lot to look at, but sitting down and taking the time to review the information on the DC network will really cut down your time in the process. So thank you guys so much. I'm just going to stop sharing, and we're going to start answering questions.
Okay, just to clarify, recording of this webinar will be available on the IRB Research Center page on DC Network in a couple of weeks. But if you would like a copy of the slides, just send an email and we'll be happy to share a copy of the slides with you in the meantime. Getting to the first question. So we have 11 questions so far. So the first question is from Terry North. With focus groups, is it appropriate to minimize, even eliminate direct quotes so other participants cannot identify who said what? Or is that not a concern? Dr. Miller?
Okay, that's a very good question. Okay, so first and foremost, focus groups are never confidential, because you can't decide what the guy next to you is going to go out and say, right? So, but what I like what you're asking is that it's how you portray the participant. So if I was to read the transcript later, or if I was to read your study later or your dissertation later, would I be able to go, huh, that really sounds a lot like what, you know, Ramya Taraga would say, and that seems like her verbiage. So and there's a lot of discussion about this, because you want to capture the voice of the participant, right? That's really important. That's part of your responsibility as a researcher, but you don't want to out your participant and who they are. So in some cases, you might, if there's a particular dialect, a particular, like a tick or something that people do when they speak that could identify them, then yes, it is your responsibility as a researcher to make sure that it's not identifiable. Now, in full disclosure, as an IRB, we wouldn't come through and say, oh, we don't think that the original transcript that you have is protecting it enough. That's really something that you do as an ethical researcher and something that your committee will support you with in writing up your data. But it's an excellent question. In fact, there's a lot of talk around this because getting the voices of the participants is important, but not putting them in a position where they could be identified. And making it very clear that while you as a researcher might hold the data confidential, that you can't control what anybody else in the group says. So I hope that that answers. It's a very, very good question though. I love that. I want to have an entire webinar on protecting the voices of participants and how you as a researcher portray the voice of the participant. I love it. So there you go. Let's see here. Do you want me to keep going? Let's see here. We have Sherry Brown. What about using Zoom audio and video? Zoom has a cloud storage for transcripts, lives. I keep and recommend to learners to use something like a data terabyte peripheral USB port to store all data and to remove after using, never keep it attached to a device. Yeah, and exactly. Now we have facial recognition, Zoom videos, and voice, by the way, I mean, you could play my voice and I bet you anybody on the IRB team would know it was me talking. So all of these things are now considered data that have to be protected. And Zoom does have an environment on the cloud where transcripts live, and you are correct. Again, we're doing our best, and we recommend that you don't store information on clouds. Storing information though on thumb drives, which are like, how many chapsticks do you lose a year? And those little, they're like a tiny chapstick. Those are also risky. It's just that we're all doing the best that we possibly can in storing the data and using and understanding the privacy policies of the environments that we do use to store the data. That's my best response. I'm not trying to sound like I'm running for office, because as we know, it changes. You know, I have a hard drive here that backs up everything on my computer. I do have some things on cloud storage. I'm doing the best that I can, and we just want to make sure that you're using secure sites and managing it and de-identifying data to the best that you possibly can. We understand if you use Zoom, and we all use Zoom, it's part of our platform, that you're going to do your best to protect the information. Okay. Oh, another great question. If using Qualtrics for surveys anonymous, then can Qualtrics eliminate this? Yes, they can. The California or the EU. From what I understand, we went to a training in November, and they were vendors at the training, and I asked them, and they talked about how they can exclude certain parts of like the EU that's part of the GDPR. However, I'm going to add on, now that I think about it, it's not, from what I understand, a free option, right? So when you pay to use one of these apps, it's, you know, they have like a smorgasbord, it's like a la carte. You pay for this, you pay for that, you pay for this, you pay for that. So you might have to pay extra for that button ability to be clicked. Now, we don't support any app in particular. I'm not an app expert. In fact, nobody in our office is an app expert for a specific app, and the apps change quickly. So what would have been available even 2 months ago with some of these apps is now different. That I know. And this is all part of your data collection plan and understanding the direction you're going to go, so that you know as a researcher, okay, this is what I have to be careful of. So again, it's part of that plan, but I do know that they can exclude things.
Mhm. And I just wanted to add a comment about that. So I know we talked about Qualtrics, but SurveyMonkey also has a training available on European Union GDPR regulation. If you really need to collect data from European Union, they have an excellent training that they offer. But just be mindful of all the processes and delays that you might encounter given the changes.
I'm going to answer Tiffany's question. On demographic questions such as ethnicity, age are covered. Yes, I mean, absolutely. And this is becoming, and this is exactly what is becoming very problematic, that researchers are asking these questions and participants do not want to answer them because it makes it so that information is not private. So please be very cognizant of what you're asking and know that it could greatly affect the ability of getting the data that you need, because people do not want to answer it. Please be cautious. I see another question at the top. If it's truly anonymous, how could you ever remove data on a person after collection demands it? Well, if it's truly anonymous, then you couldn't, right? But if there's some way to identify them, like age, race, even though you might not say, you know, where do you live or something, if there's a way that you could connect it to a participant based on the deductive disclosure, meaning there's a way to look at the information and say, okay, based on this person's age and this person's race, I think it was, you know, Heather. Then in that case, technically you're supposed to get it out. But what you're asking though is a great question, because logistically, how would you do that? And right now there's no guidance on exactly how that would happen. But what we're asking you is to make sure that you're not put in the position in the first place. Okay. What does a researcher do if a participant wants to be identified? Okay, that's a great question, because if you're in an interview and you're interviewing somebody and they might say, you know, they might, whatever, they tell you about them and their position and what they do. And that's a very natural part of a good interview. You would have, you know, building rapport. When you read the literature about having a good interview, you build rapport. And I might say, yes, you know, this is what I do and how long I've been doing it. Oh, I live here and I got, you know, you find out a lot of information. So building rapport and finding out information about your participants and writing that up are two different things, right? So when you write it up, you've built rapport with me, we've had our interview, you want to de-identify enough data so that you still couldn't connect it to me, but you could still have a rich description of me as your participant in your study, the description of the sample, right? So again, it's being a cognizant researcher. In a case of an interview, you would keep the information confidential, right? You wouldn't tie your interview to me directly to me, but it's still your responsibility to make it so that somebody couldn't read your interview and go, oh, Stacy was talking to Heather. I know it because I can tell by the way the words were or the description. So you want to have enough description to do a good job. Clearly, that's what we want you to do for your study, but not too much that you could connect it to an individual. So it's up to you as a researcher to make sure. Okay, let me see here. Using SurveyMonkey for Arizona participants for customers of hybrid and electric automobiles. Will the auto companies assist researchers like us? No idea. You're going to have to call them and find out to the best of your ability. That's some digging on your part, and that's part of feasibility, is finding out how you're going to access your participants. And so maybe they will, maybe they won't. They might have their own restrictions. They might never respond. Those are all things that you would want to do some digging to see if they're even going to play in the same baseball park. Okay. Oh, do you want me to keep going? There's a question.
I can, you know,
okay.
just to
so I can get a drink of my tea here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Give you a break. So there is a question from Ray. US study, non-California, if using SurveyMonkey, is it enough to say or write no ISP addresses will be collected, that survey will be assigned a numeric code? Is that enough? So I think first thing is you'll have to work with SurveyMonkey to figure out how you're going to make the data collection anonymous, okay? So that is for you to think about. And secondly, when you submit to the IRB, you need to provide us details on what you have in place to collect data with SurveyMonkey or whatever platform you're using. Gregory Okafor, do I have to submit a draft of my site authorization request to the IRB before sending it across to the college where I would conduct my interviews? Please use the template we have, but it's not, you need to make sure there are important points that you touch upon in your site authorization letter. You need to make sure you have the purpose of the study, the eligibility criteria, what are all the research activities you're requesting, any additional resources that you're requesting from the site, and so on and so forth. So site authorization is an agreement that you have with the site, so you want to make sure everything's documented.
And you might, in that case, if it's a college, you might have to go through that college's IRB. So you would want to do some due diligence and checking to see what that college will require. I do want to answer Eugene Benner's question. I need to, so Eugene, this is a great question. Do we have to have a consent form for each method of data collection, such as interviews, observations, surveys, etc.? Okay, it's all about the way you're going to collect your data. In a nutshell, no data may be collected prior to informed consent. Zero data. I cannot stress this enough. So you may not collect data until somebody has indicated they're willing to be a part of the study, and that's in the informed consent. So if you're going to interview them first, you need to know the sequence of events. So if Eugene, you decide you're going to interview everybody first, you would have an informed consent. Let's pretend I'm the participant. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to sign it. And I'm say, yes, Eugene's going to have me in this one-to-one interview, and then Eugene's going to send me a survey link, and I'm going to be in Eugene's focus group. Got it. I sign it. Then after you interview me, you could send me the link for the survey, and you could send me you could have me in your focus group, because I've already signed informed consent prior to any data being collected. However, let's say you want to send out a survey on online faculty, and anybody who and you want to find some information out, and then you want to kind of put out a, hey, if you're willing to be interviewed, would you be interviewed? So if you're collecting information that's not anonymous, I'm going to go ahead, fill out the survey. You might need a signature from me, and maybe I tell one of my peers. So I call up Dr. Garrett and I'm like, hey, Linda, I don't want to be a part of the study, but this guy is looking for people to be in his study. And she goes to you. If you don't have an informed consent for her, because she never filled out the survey to go through the consent process, then you would have to have consent from her as well. So there's no magic way to answer your question, because it's going to depend upon your sequence of events when you're collecting data. But the short answer is you may have to have informed consent for separate types of data collection if you have multiple parts, multiple data collection strategies, and you could have multiple people and they're not all doing the same thing. Maybe some people are going to be in the survey, so that would be different than the people who are going to be in the focus group, which would be different. That's going to be for people who are going to be interviewed. So this is why we stress it's important to have a plan, a clear plan. Like I recommend like a map in a sequence of when things are going to happen. And if two things are going to happen at the same time, what are you going to do to ensure that you have consent prior to collecting any data? So it can be complicated, and this is something that we really want you to work on at the proposal stage with your committee so that you have a clear plan and an idea of where you're going to go.
So we have a question from William about what are some of the best ways to store electronic data, local storage only, such as in the researcher's office. Same question regarding paper documents. So there is no easy answer, but just something to consider. So when it comes to electronic data, just be mindful that if you're storing any kind of confidential information, any kind of identifiers, please don't store them on the cloud. You want to be careful because anybody, what if somebody hacks and, they can hack into your computer also, but it's much more serious. The cloud storage is something that you don't have a control upon. So make sure that wherever you store the data, you need to have some kind of control over the data. Um, that's just a thought, but if somebody has any additional
Yeah.
comments.
I mean, it's really, it changes all the time. And I have to say, in my world of, of being an IRB person, I've seen funny things like I will take all data, put it in a 50-gallon drum and burn it with kerosene, right? So I mean, some people get really, comical / that's what we used to do, is burn the paper, right? So what we're asking you to do is what's the best of your ability. That's what we all do. We're just working to the best of our ability because it behooves you as an ethical researcher to make sure that you're doing what's best to your ability. And what we do know is what's technologically okay today might be technologically different in 6 months from now. So we're just doing the best that we can. And it's the best answer we've got right now. Michelle Lace is asking about assigning random numbers to identify participants, but it's still an identifier because somewhere you would have a number associated with a person. So that's still considered an identifier.
Okay.
An anonymous attendee says, I'm in California and my population is in California. My research looks at educational background, training, employment. So now do I have to redo my entire topic? No, you don't have to redo your entire topic, but you have to understand that you need to have a plan. If that person gives you the data and now they want it back, how you're going to get it back, how you're going to protect it, and you're going to need to become an expert on the California policy because it will absolutely affect how you proceed and what you include in your informed consent. But you don't have to redo your whole topic. You just need to understand the feasibility issues that are going to come, associated with it. Okay, let's see here.
Let me know when you need a break.
Yeah, go ahead. You can go ahead.
Okay, Tiffany is asking a question. How would you destroy the data after 3 to 5 years if it is on Qualtrics or if you have it on a hard drive? I think we pretty much answered that with the previous question, saying you do the best, right? To destroy the data, explain how you're going to do it, and we'll see if that works. Regarding Qualtrics, I think Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, every company has a certain timeline for how long they'll store the data. So you want to make sure you download whatever data you need from them or get all the information you need from them before you close the account or do whatever with the account.
I would like to address Kelly Hall's question. What is the IRB's perspective on how interview questions be tested? Okay, this is a bigger question that has to come from the AQR team, and they're working really diligently on coming up with what it means to have a field versus a pilot. A pilot test is something that means you're going to have to go through the IRB process because a pilot is a little baby study. That's different than field testing your questions. And I don't want us to go down too much down that path. But in a nutshell, if your population is protected or vulnerable, meaning if you're in doubt, you can ask us and we'll tell you. But a person's with a disability who isn't able to make their own decision, who has a legally authorized representative who makes decisions for them, anybody under the age of 18, members of people who are in public schools, but they might be 18, like if you have a senior and they're 18, but they're still in a public school, Native Americans, prisoners, all of those people would be different rules than if you were to field test your questions with a group that mirrors your participant population but isn't protected. So I'm trying to, it's if you're in doubt on whether or not you need to go through the IRB before, please ask us and we'll consult on our end. Do you want to look at?
So we have a question on From Shaim Herrera.
Yeah.
I plan to use patient's medical record number to gather data in electronic medical record. How do I protect patient's identifier aside from discarding it after the needed variables are collected? What are the most common process or steps to make sure that I'm fully protecting patient's identifier? First thing, whenever you're collecting any kind of protected health information, it needs to comply with the HIPAA regulations. And if you are, we're assuming that you're getting the information from a hospital. If you are, you need to go through the hospital's IRB for approval, okay? GCU IRB is not a privacy board, so we cannot offer you guidance on that. So anything to do with patient information, identifiable patient information, you need to go through the hospital's IRB to get their approval. And if you don't have, you don't work at the hospital, then what you need to do is to have the site provide de-identified data to you.
And I want to just echo this concern. A lot of researchers are working professionals. So every day, like right now, I can log in to my computer and I can see information that would be protected by FERPA, right, for students in the university environment. But I can't use that for my personal research. So you need to understand your role as a researcher versus your role as a professional. And while you might have the hat on as a professional, you have all kinds of access to medical record data. That is not the same as your role as a novice researcher, and you're going to have the proper permissions and access. Anything to do, like Dr. Taraga said, with healthcare, you're going to have to go through the hospital's IRB. And actually, in most circumstances, even though it would, if that's your job within the hospital, they usually get another person to give you the data de-identified for your role as a novice researcher. So I know I keep saying this, and I say it because it's so important. You need to really look at the overall feasibility of your study and understand your role and who you're asking to get information from and what you're asking and how you're going to get it. So any of that upfront work will really help you both outline the framework of your proposal and help you with getting data collection in a timely manner.
Okay, we just have 10 minutes, just FYI.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee. How do you manage incentives with surveys and keep the surveys anonymous? You cannot have anonymity if you are giving incentives to somebody, unless it is some sort of Amazon MTurk. But even with that, any kind of incentive, you need to give anything to a particular participant, then there is no anonymity. It is all confidential. Okay. Over to you, Dr. Miller.
Okay. If recruiting participants through a LinkedIn group who are members of a trade organization, oh, do you need site authorization? Okay. If let's say William, it's your personal LinkedIn, and you're going to post it there, and it's not a closed group. So we ask you to get permission from any closed groups. And you'll know what a closed group is if you go to get into the group and it says this group is closed or there's a moderator, right? That's a closed group. So if it's a closed group, then you'll need to have permission. If it's your page and you post a flyer on there and people contact you, it's not a closed group. So your criteria would be that you are a member of ATD. And, that would be your criteria. But if you're not asking ATD to post it for you, then you don't need their specific permission. But you would need to include as part of your criteria the people who are part of the study are a member of ATD. And I hope that the differences are clear. So in a nutshell, if you're posting on an open social media source like your LinkedIn, you don't need permission from yourself. But if you're going to post it on the ATD LinkedIn's group, and it's a closed group that only ATD members are members of, then yes, you would need permission. Okay. Glasses on and off here.
I'll answer this one. There's a question from Ranjit Singh. I'm conducting a quantitative analysis where I'm looking at purchase intentions, attitudes, and behaviors. This looks like a lot of personal data. What role will automobile companies play with the changed rules, if any? I think more than automobile companies, you need to be aware, do a little bit of research and find out how you're going to protect the information, and then provide that as a part of your request for site authorization, and provide that information, and then the automobile company will decide whether they want to move forward or not.
Yeah, and I just want to be really cautious that you're really looking at the feasibility of your study as well, because in general, it's going to be challenging to get an automobile companies may not want to share with you data about purchasing intentions. So I would be doing some groundwork to make sure that they'll be willing to participate in your study. Okay, oh, I saw one from Luis. So Luis is from Los Angeles Unified School District. Thank you for working there. That's a big one. And in the past 26 months, I've stated multiple times that the student data will be delivered in an anonymously pre-coded Excel file. The district requires an agreement, and GCU too. Yes, yes, and yes, Luis. It looks like you've been doing some background work. You have covered it. So if your district is going to want you to have a data use agreement and we want you to have one, then you've got it. You are correct. That's what you will have. And right now, based on what you've written, and again, I can only go based on what you've written, you are in the correct path. Okay. Let's see here. 3 groups.
So Tiffany is asking, if I have 3 groups, I don't know what the 3 groups are, and looking to study each group separately and together, would I need to identify each participant besides what group they are in? So I think that's for you to assess, right? The whole idea of what is your plan to collect the data and what kind of information you're getting from these groups, and whether that information you collect will be able to identify a participant. And anytime you're collecting identifiable information from the participant, you need to consider a lot of things. So I don't know if that answered the question, but.
I was like, Sherry's asking about tombs or tomes. I don't know what that is. Okay, for a participant who wants a copy of a published dissertation, then they leave an email usually. Oh, I think that you're talking about if a participant wants a copy of the dissertation after the study has been written up. I think that that's what you mean. So it used to be something that informed consents would say, if you want a copy of this study, please contact me and I'll give it to you later. But I think we've taken all that language out. That's no longer part of our, actually, that's no longer part of anybody's that I know of, or anything to do with the regulations. So let's say I'm a participant in a study and I know who did the study because I know their name. I can, on my own volition, look later on, but no way do we have our researchers emailing copies of the study out to old research participants. So that's been taken out of the informed consent actually for quite a while. So.
I wanted to just address a question Dr. Graham had, and it was about are students required to upload their consent forms to the folder 5 in their LDP? And that just is a good reminder. Number one, that the folder that we have in the LDP for learners is folder 6. So it's the IRB materials. And the best way to ensure that you get through IRB as efficiently as possible is to work with your chair, learners, all of the learners out here, get those documents into that folder and then work with your chair so that they have a chance to review your informed consent, they have a chance to review your recruiting materials, and also, look at your plan for data protection, et cetera, so that you know, that's as clean and neat and tidy as possible before you submit into IRB. So make sure you take advantage of that folder and get your materials in there and let your chair know that you've uploaded those documents for their review. And so that's a really great question and an important one for all of you on the call, chairs and learners, to make sure you use that folder efficiently. So that, and then also too, a lot of the questions that are posted, you know, a little bit of repeat and redundancy. The best way to ensure, if you have a question really more personal to your own project, you know, jump onto our IRB office hours every Wednesday at 10:30. If you go to the DC network, you'll see the link, and you can just click the Zoom link and log in, and our team, one of our team members is there to answer your questions. And then the irb@gcu.edu email, if you use that to send a question or go onto the IRB resource or research center on the DC network, and you can review the materials, and there's a link there as well to get your questions answered. So, and that just actually routes to our IRB inbox as well. So just want to put a plug in for that, for that resource on the LDP.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time on those, so please take a peek at those. There's a couple of other questions from Tara North has another one. It says, if you make the data anonymous, one link, one individual, do we need to address how to affect like ballot stuffing, like the same guy taking the same survey 100 times? And the answer is when you pay for those services with SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics, again, that's something that you can prevent. In the webinar I gave last week, and in the information that will be posted soon, hopefully within a week, there's also concern now with some of those with bots answering questions, and there's a way to kind of trick the bots so that you're getting the accurate information. But a lot of these survey apps like Qualtrics, well, when I say a lot, Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, MTurk, they're on this, right? So they can help you make sure that you're not having that problem.
Yeah, they have this covered. SurveyMonkey has this covered.
Okay, I think that
I think we'll need to stop, and then if you have any additional questions or we missed answering your questions, please send an email to irb@gcu.edu. And as Dr. Bainbridge suggested, please jump into the IRB office hours. We're available to answer your questions every Wednesday, 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Arizona time. The link is posted on the homepage of DC Network. And with that, I think we'll end the webinar now. Thank you and have a good day.